Right, to say with that story, as well, of course, as the recent controversies that we're seeing also at the National Assembly, with some opposition parties walking out of the process of debate around the Basic Education Law Amendment Bill. Joining us now, education expert Professor Metcalfe, National Association of School Governing Bodies General Secretary Matakanye Matakanye, and Naptosa's Executive Director Basil Manuel. Good to have you all, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. Professor Metcalfe, can we begin with you? What we are seeing, for example, playing out in Midrand, my daughter was not protected, the parents say. My daughter was touched, and I said, do not touch my daughter. The parent was grabbed, and I was pulled to the floor, and so on and so forth. And all this is around a policy and code of conduct that stems from, I suppose, practices that would have come up from the independent school and what they've put together. But is that which is playing out the primary maybe reason or maybe secondary reason why we need to look at the South African Schools Act of 1996 and the Employment of Educators Act of 1998 and tweak them a little bit?
I haven't yet made that connection myself, Thabo. How I saw this terrible incident is maybe two key issues. Number one, the issue of white prejudice against black hair. It is just absurd, and it's international. And I think that we need to support African women and men, girls and boys, who say, this is who I am, this is my hair. And for it to become an issue of control, particularly by people who have no sensitivity to the variations of hair, which exist everywhere, but to racialize it just makes everybody, well, should make everyone very angry. Yeah. The second component is the physical force that was used. I haven't seen the video yet, but from what I hear, it is appalling to see adults abusing a young person like that. To see adults abusing anyone is terrible, but in an education context, it's unacceptable.
Absolutely. I'm drawing the parallel because part of the issues that, for example, are being debated around the Bella Bill is the power that would be given, for example, to MECs in vetoing policy decisions that would have been made by school governing bodies and so on and so forth, and how they get to then interact with independent schools. And I'm wondering if, for example, government had a way of intervening in this particular policy a little bit earlier, this would have been avoided.
It's a lovely question, and I want to say two things. Firstly, in terms of independent schooling, we have to be guided by the Constitution. And the Constitution is clear about protection of rights. It's clear about the importance of respect. In terms of government schooling, one of the points that I think is missed by some of the debates that I've heard is that to make education compulsory puts responsibilities on the state as much as it does on parents, even more so on the state. And the state, therefore, in a context where we should celebrate the achievement of compulsory education, the state has a responsibility to provide schools, to provide guidance in respect of what happens in schools, to use public money for the benefit of the entire community.
Yeah. Dr. Matakanye, the situation that we're seeing playing out here, others would look at it and say, well, the school would say, we need to be given space to be able to craft our own code of conduct so that we are able to instill discipline within our teaching environment. And now we are letting things like a hair policy come in to interfere with that situation of what we are trying to create. And therefore, it comes to this fact of whether or not the SGB, the school governing body, should be given that leeway to come up with things like a hair policy, even if maybe they might not particularly understand how black hair, for example, works.
Thank you very much, Thabo, and good evening to my leadership there, as well as all the listeners of Newzroom 24, Newzroom Afrika. Now, firstly, Thabo, I want to call upon the parents in South Africa that it is time that when you register a child in a school, in the same vein, demand the policy. They must provide a policy of that particular school. And if there is no policy, make sure that you nag the school governing body to establish a policy in the school. That is the right of the school governing bodies. But what played out, Thabo, is unacceptable. It's because the policy states very clearly the steps that you must take if a child has gone against the policy in the school. Firstly, you have to suspend the child. Secondly, you call for a hearing. You call for the parents. Yeah. But it is unacceptable to assault the child, as this child was assaulted in the school. So it is clear that that particular adult has used apartheid tactics to deal with the child. And we cannot accept this at this time in South Africa. We are saying we are all South Africans, and we are still building one South Africa. But if there are still people who think that now we still have to go prior 1994, I think they just have to pack their bags and go to a place where they feel is better for them, not South Africa. South Africa does not want such people. And we want to say once again, parents, please stand up. It is time that when you register a child, yes, demand. We don't want to hear stories like this, that there was toy, there was what. And what does the policy say? Why did you allow that type of a policy in school? Because you are given powers, you have given rights.
Let's talk about that. I know we are talking about the hair policy right now, but for example, in the bill, the point of contention is around, for example, the language policy. The clause there that seeks to amend Section 6 of the South African Schools Act of 1996 to provide for the governing body to submit the language policy of public schools and any amendment thereof to the head of the department for approval. The language policy must also take into consideration the language needs of the broader community. Would something like a hair policy, I mean, would you be okay with the fact that after the school governing body has crafted it, to be taken to a head of the department, in this case an MEC, to approve it?
Of course, the South African Schools Act allow the MEC, allow the HOD to also have a weight in terms of the policies. Now, these policies, after being crafted by the school government, that they are submitted to the HOD, they are submitted to the MEC, if they submitted to the MEC. For the MEC, for the HOD to check whether they do comply with the South African Constitution. And if they don't comply with the South African Constitution, then the HOD, the MEC, have the right to return that policy back to the school so that they look into it. Must comply with the Constitution of South Africa. But now when it comes to policy, we, as National Association of School Government, we agree that we really have to tamper with admission, we have to tamper with the policy, with the language. Because, look, the department, as I'm talking, has a policy that says incremental introduction of African languages. But people are still refusing to do that in the public school, but they call those schools their schools. And it's not their schools. Those are public schools for every South African. So they are calling them to a school. And they still think back to English medium, to Afrikaans medium. That time has passed. then we are all equal. We have to go to a school where you feel your child could attend, and the school that a parents chooses to attend. So this language is being used to bar these children from attending those schools. But it's a very sensitive matter because there are 12 official languages in this country, but we are still seeing this country having only 2 languages, English and Afrikaans. That is not acceptable. And we know that now the question of language is sensitive. It banned this country, if you try to say, Thabo, 1976. I think 1976 when the country was on fire, it was because of the language.
All right.
And we don't want to see this thing again. That's why we feel we support the department to tamper with the language, the admission language policy.
Right, back with you tonight. Let's continue our conversation on the Basic Education Law Amendment Bill as well as the controversial hair policy at a school in Midrand. Still with us, Professor Metcalfe, the school governing body's General Secretary, Matakanye Matakanye, and the Executive Director of Naptosa, Basil Manuel. Basil, let's come back to you then. One of the areas also of contention around the bill is the question of corporal punishment. The bill, one, confirming the conversation that we've always, you and I had around corporal punishment. It's no longer allowed at schools, according to the bill. It proposes that a person who carries out corporal punishment pay a fine or be sent to prison. Now, one of the things that is being debated is what do you define as corporal punishment? And others are saying, well, anything that is deemed punishment that is demeaning to the pupil should be considered corporal punishment. And others are looking at this act of the hair. And just the mere fact of singling out this child because she's got dreadlocks and saying, well, get out of the class, or I'm sending you home, that in itself, besides being pushed around and anything else, would you say is in itself a demeaning act of punishing the child for what you deem an inappropriate hairstyle?
Thabo, let me greet the guests here, Mary and Matakanye. At first, let me just say, yes, of course. And remember that corporal punishment has been outlawed a long time ago through the courts. And so it has just been formalized in law now. So it is not as though people don't know this. And even the grand debate around what constitutes corporal is in part a useless debate because we all know what it is. If you infringe on the dignity of somebody, it is certainly demeaning. And nobody in their right minds in South Africa in 2023 can think that a hair policy is a valid policy in a school. What that does is it cheapens the whole idea of having a code of conduct. And unfortunately, it is these little incidents. And it's not little for that child, but it's little in that it breaks down bit by bit the good intention of having a code of conduct. Code of conducts are useful, and they were never intended to be about hair and looks and things like that. It was about conducting the behavior of children, to see that because we are in a big group, our behavior must be such that we can tolerate one another and we don't infringe upon each other's freedoms. And that was the intention. Now, these people have added to the breaking down of what is in fact a very, very good idea. But, Thabo, to continue, when we look at things like exclusion because of language, etc. We must understand that language is contested, as Matakanye says. But I believe that what we do when we create these crazy policies, we create the opportunity for another overseer to come in and then take control over things that should best be done at school. And this is where that danger lies. We walk a very thin line. I am, and Naptosa is of the view that a policy like a code of conduct, a policy like language policy is very easily done within the guidelines that are out there already by a school. But when you start messing up, you are inviting in. And even though people say, okay, we've had court rulings, etc., the court rulings didn't say this must be handled by the MEC. It said the MEC has a right to step in, or the minister has a right to step in. So when nonsense happens by a few, it creates this opportunity for large-scale meddling, which is a great pity. But Matakanye is right. In today's day and age, we have to lament the fact that we have done such a little, that we have failed to bring more of our indigenous languages into the mainstream of teaching. That is one of the realities and sad facts of life that we face now.
Yeah. Prof, let's bring you back in. Except for the broad definition of what would be considered compulsory starting age for schooling and where accountability and responsibility would lie, what in your view would you say is most critical in terms of the amendment that needs to be done to the South African School Act of 1996?
You've taken away the things that I think are most critical. So I would say that the lowering of the age of compulsory education is very important. And that I think we should be celebrating. I think we also need to acknowledge the concern that this is going to add additional demands on the fiscus. But I think what the country is saying is that this is necessary. We need to bring young learners into school, into grade R. I personally wouldn't support going below grade R. I think below grade R, learners are best supported early learning programs. But from grade R, I would say that that's critical, and it should be something that we celebrate. The other amendments, I've actually been a little bit puzzled because many of the amendments that people talk about have been there for years. In fact, even your example of corporal punishment was outlawed in the original Schools Act of 1996. Compulsory education and the persuasions on parents to comply with compulsory education have been there since 1996. So the only, perhaps that I think significant changes, which again have been misunderstood, is the responsibility of the state to make sure that all schools are optimally used for all language groups in a community. And the simple principle, which is clear in the law, is you cannot have empty spaces when children cannot be accommodated because their language group is not accommodated in the school. It's simple economics and practicality. It's not saying that government is going to be changing language policies of schools. It says you've got to take into account the demographic shifts. And that's just sensible. I would say that it also then behoves government to make sure that they give the necessary resources to the school to be able to cope with more than one language if traditionally they've only used one language. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see many big issues. I suppose the other one is concerns about homeschooling.
Yeah, I wanted to bring you in there because I would like to hear your views on that. To say, I mean, are parents justified in their apprehension around government making that decision to say, well, you're going to be interfering with my right to homeschool my child?
I would like to say that we have to understand that education is a public good, that there is a responsibility on the state to look after the best interest of all learners. I know people who homeschool who do a magnificent job with their children. They dedicate their lives to it. They work with them day in and day out. But it is necessary for the state to say, please can we ensure as a country that in contexts where families choose to educate their children at home, that they meet the minimum standards that we would expect in a public school, that the assessment is moderated externally, that they have the resources to do it. I would regard it as irresponsible if we did not say we need to check, we need to support. you need to meet minimum standards.
All right.
Basil's going to agree with me.
He looks set to agree. I'll come to you in a moment. But Matakanye, let's bring you here. Here's an area around SGBs and the question of fundraising and the whole question of the sale of alcohol on school premises. Do you support the amendments?
It's a no go area. We don't want to see alcohol sold in our schools. We cannot be beaten by the liquor board. When the liquor board took a decision that a shebeen, a tavern, a bar must be 500 meters away from the school. Even if it is not enough, but at least they've tried. Now you turn around and say, no. Liquor board, they did not think properly. No, let's bring the liquor into the school. I don't care whether the children are there, but the message that this adults wants to send out there, what is it? We know what liquor does to our lives, to the lives of our communities, to the lives of society. So what are you saying to the minds of these young children? They would not see anything wrong if liquor is going to be sold in the school, whether they are aware or they are. But the following day when they come to school, there are a lot of bottles that are littering around the school. Or then some of them will come because you will not really say, bring along the ID so that we can see that you are 18 or not. But your interest is profit. Anybody who comes and buy, then you are going to sell that liquor. So it's a no go area. Muduli, we don't want to see that. They will have made a big mistake if liquor can be. Yes, of course, there are methods. There are good methods of fundraising, and we are saying then there are a lot of methods that we can use, but without really selling liquor. We can sell meat, we can sell boerewors, we can sell what and all them. We can sell meat, we can sell anything in the school. Because the message that will be sent into the young minds, it will be wrong to this. So it's a no. We are saying,
it's a no. Very emphatic and very clear.
Wrong message.
Very clear no from Matakanye there on the question of sale. Let's take a break again because I want to give Basil an opportunity as well to weigh in just before we wrap up our conversation this afternoon. What are your thoughts on some of the key touch points that we have looked at? Of course, homeschooling, a big question. The age in which it should be made compulsory for schools to be for children to be in school, and of course the question on the sale of liquor. 072-110-5584. Otherwise, you can access at Newzroom 405. Thank you for weighing in. 072-110-5584. Let's look at some of the messages that have come through. At least we've got one coming through there from Lisa in Midrand saying, surprising that the school is operating illegally. Why not make it a crime to operate a school illegally? Parents must ensure that schools comply with legal requirements before registering learners. Thank you, Lisa, for weighing in. You can keep those messages coming. 072-110-5584. Basil, let's come back to you on two areas that I think you would want to weigh in. I don't know how serious they are about this, but I saw a tweet in one of the platforms saying that there's a suggestion that the compulsory age of schooling should be 3. And what's your feeling on that? And of course the question around the regulation of homeschooling.
Pablo, I think I would agree that the world over, the entry age varies, with Britain being 4 and so on. However, we have a context. And let's understand that our context at the moment, without the grade R's being in, which I'm hugely excited about, we still have overcrowded classrooms. We still have too few classrooms. We still have mud schools and the like. So whilst the intention is good, we have a mountain to climb. I want to welcome the inclusion of grade R. We made this input in 2017. We made it again in 2020 on the same bill, because this bill has been around for a long time. And we are excited. We want to see grade R's coming in, and we want to see, because I was a principal of a primary school, and I can tell you there was a big difference between the children who came in that were never in a preschool compared against the children who were in a grade R class. It's a mountain of difference. And so it is very important. To take it further down at this stage, I don't think we can do it. We can't afford to do it. And beside, I think we must first consolidate what we are attempting to do now. That's the first point. Insofar as some of these other issues are concerned, alcohol, etc., I think it's a distraction, to be very honest, because we're getting very, very heated under the collar about this, and I've got to agree with my good friend Matakanye that we sit with so many other problems. Why would we want to fiddle with something? I'll give you an example. I was looking in preparation through some of my old notes, and we had written about this. We said, in the EA, it says, an educator must be dismissed if he or she is found guilty of having a sexual relationship with the learner of the school where he or she is an employee. And we said, this is what you must amend. You must be dismissed if they have a relationship with any child, a sexual relationship, not only where the school where you are an employee. Those are the things that these committees should be looking at, not fiddling with things like alcohol. That's a real nonsense. Coming to homeschooling, I've got to agree with Mary. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to understand that somebody must quality assure what you're doing. We can't allow people just to do as they please. And then at the end of the day, in the country, we've got to take responsibility for those youngsters being able to enter into tertiary education, for them to enter into the workplace, etc. So this is not sinister. I don't see it as being sinister at all. I do, of course, foresee that it is going to be costly, because homeschools have mushroomed for whatever reason. And Mary's right. Some people are doing a fantastic job, but we don't know if all of them are. And that is exactly the point. So we need to have some system of checks and balances, because it is in the interest of the child first. And we know what our Constitution says about the interests of the child. And that is where we stop. We are saying, is it in the interest of the child or is it not? Yes, it is. Go ahead. And that is the final point there.
Prof, let's wrap it up like this. I mean, one of the considerations also around the bill is the sensitivity towards cultural beliefs. And in this particular instance, we're also talking a Christian school, so religious observances. And I think that's a toasty issue for the ACDP, I beg your pardon, because that's part of the reasons why they would have walked out to say, well, our considerations were actually not even mentioned or cited in this bill.
Sorry, let me go first.
Yeah, go
Absolutely. Absolutely. We, in today's day and age, we've got to understand that we are all South Africans of all sorts of belief systems, and we've got to deal sensitively with that. There are schools where every child is still Christian. That's true. There are schools where the vast majority of children may be Hindu, and that's true. However, you can't forget that there is that child that isn't. And religion is something for the home. It's something for your temple or your mosque, etc. And it's the parents' responsibility. It's not the state's responsibility to teach religion. It's the parents' responsibility.
Yes, Prof, you absolutely agree.
I absolutely agree. If I can just add to what Basil has said, is that my fundamental right to practice my cultural beliefs, my religious beliefs, is a right that depends on me extending that same right to others.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Mr. Matakanye, your final parting shot on that?
I agree with my leaders there. I agree with Basil. I agree with Comrade Mary. I don't want to spoil what they said. It's fundamental.
I appreciate you all. Thank you very much for coming on and for joining us tonight. Professor Mary Metcalfe, Basil Manuel, and Matakanye, and you as well for weighing in on our conversation tonight.